Welcome back to Wishtree. We are starting on chapter 14 today. Those houses, my houses, one painted blue, one painted green, one with a black door, one with a brown door, one with a yellow mailbox, one with a red mailbox. For well over a century, I'd stared at them, prim and proper, same small size, same boxy shape, same pitched roofs and squat brick chimneys, architectural siblings. Long before they were a glimmer in some builder's eye, I was here, right in the middle of things. If my roots stretched past the property line that separated them, well, that's never been my concern. Roots can be unruly. Mine explored the earth below both houses, pirouetted around their plumbing, anchored their foundations. I spread my shade fairly. I dropped my leaves evenly. I bombed their roofs with acorns in equal number. I did not play favorites. Over the years, many families had called those houses home. Babies and teenagers, grandparents and great-grandparents. They spoke Chinese and Spanish, Yoruba and English and French Creole. They ate tamales and pani puri, dim sum and fufu, and grilled cheese sandwiches. Different languages, different food, different customs. That's our neighborhood, wild and tangled and colorful, like the best kind of garden. A few months ago, a new family, Samar's family, rented the Blue House. They were from a distant country. Their ways were unfamiliar. Their words held new music. Just another transplant in our messy garden, it seemed. Except that this time, something changed. The air was uneasy. The parents in the greenhouse refused to welcome the new family. There were polite nods between the adults at first, but then even those vanished. Other things happened. Someone threw raw eggs at the Blue House. One afternoon, a car passed by filled with angry men yelling angry things. Things like, "Muslims, get out!" Sometimes Samar would walk home trailed by children taunting her. I love people dearly, and yet 216 rings, and I still haven't figured them out. Our neighborhood had welcomed many families from far away. What was different this time? The headscarf Samar's mother wore, or was it something else? As all this unfolded, busybody that I am, I kept tabs, eavesdropped, observed. I never interfered, though. Trees are impartial observers. We are the strong and silent type. Besides, what could I possibly do? I had limbs, but they could merely sway. I had a trunk, but it was rooted to the earth. I had a voice, but it could not be used. My resources were limited. So too, as it turned out, was my patience. Chapter 15. When you're the neighborhood wish tree, people talk. It didn't take long for folks to learn about the ugly word carved into my trunk. People stopped to stare. They gathered in little groups. They grimaced and shook their heads and murmured. By lunchtime, the police had arrived. I am not, as it happens, a stranger to law enforcement. A pair of calico kittens reside across the street. They love climbing up my trunk to my uppermost branches. Unfortunately, they don't love climbing back down. In the last 2 months, Lewis and Clark have been rescued twice by the fire department and 3 times by the police. Sandy and Max, the same police officers who'd rescued the kittens just last week, climbed out of their patrol car to check me out. They frowned. They searched the lawn for clues. They talked to passers-by and took photos. "Bongo," I whispered, "I'm an official crime scene." She was not amused. The owner of the houses, and therefore technically of me, was the one who'd called the police. Francesca, tall and thin, with short dove-gray hair, lived across the street. The blue and green houses had belonged to her family for generations. Francesca was also the owner of Lewis and Clark, my intrepid visitors. With a grim look on her face, Francesca strode across the street to talk to the police. Lewis and Clark squirmed in her arms. "That tree," Francesca said to Sandy, who was taking notes on a little pad. "It's been nothing but trouble for as long as I can remember." Francesca has never been the sentimental sort. She likes cats more than trees. To each her own. I happen to like trees more than cats. "Oh, but people love the wish tree," said Sandy. She looked me up and down. "Although I imagine it's a lot of work for you." "Every year, the day after wishing day, I swear I'm going to cut that thing down," Francesca said. It was true, but I knew Francesca didn't mean it. She and I went way back. "The cleanup isn't the worst of it," Francesca continued. "The things people wish for, the craziness. Last year someone wrote, 'I wish for chocolate spaghetti,' in permanent marker, on a pair of underwear. Tossed it way up high." "Chocolate spaghetti," Sandy said. "I could get behind that." "Craziness, I tell you." Francesca stared at me. "It's just a tree after all. Just a tree." Just a tree seemed a tad unfair, but Francesca looked tired and angry, so I tried not to take it personally. Sandy closed her notebook. "People believe what they want to believe about trees. She stared at the newly carved word. About people, too. What now? Francesca asked. Dunno, Sandy said. The tree belongs to you, not the new family, and you've been here forever. Francesca smiled sadly. Suppose it could be me they're hoping will leave. They watched Max place a circle of yellow crime scene tape near my trunk using metal stakes. Don't think so, Francesca, Sandy said. Max joined them. He stroked the kittens, who purred loudly. One problem in terms of prosecuting anyone, he said, is the history of this tree. It's almost May, when people leave their wishes or whatever. Hard to say for sure this isn't part of the whole, tradition thing, he shrugged. That's assuming we figure out who did this, mind you. People are supposed to make their wishes on a rag or piece of paper, not carve it into the trunk, Francesca said. That's why back in Ireland they called these raggy trees. Nowadays, a lot of people just tie a tag around a branch and leave their nutty wishes. She shrugged. In any case, leave is not a wish, it's a threat. It certainly is, Max agreed. Francesca nodded at the cracked and buckled sidewalks leading to both houses. Tell you one thing, Wishtree or not, this oak is destroying the sidewalks, messing with the plumbing too. Roots go on forever. She shook her head. Maybe it really is time to cut it down. No more leaves to rake, no more wishing day mess, no more of this unkindness. Louis leapt from Francesca's grasp and dashed for my trunk. Sandy tackled him just in time. We'll finish up our investigation in a day or two. Be out of your hair, Max said. Then you'll be free to do whatever you want with the tree. Francesca said, taking Louis from Sandy, my father almost cut this tree down years ago. My mother wasn't having it. Family lore or some such thing. Soft-hearted nonsense. She sighed. Guess it's up to me. Meantime, you keep us posted if anything else happens, Sandy advised. Francesca headed across the lawn, holding the kittens close. Leave, she murmured. What a world. What a world we live in. So there's the tree with the police tape around it. And there's the kittens, Louis and Clark. Chapter 16. When you're a tree, a phase like cut it down is bound to get your attention. Francesca had hinted at such things before, but always in jest, after a long October afternoon raking my newly shed leaves into crisp hills, or after a particularly messy wishing day, or after stepping on my acorns and bare feet. I felt bad about the walkways. It's an occupational hazard. To stay alive, I need a vast network of roots, and roots can be surprisingly strong. Did you hear that? Bongo asked, watching Francesca enter her house. She sounded serious this time. I've heard it all before, I said. Unfortunately, the newbies heard her too, Bongo said. Bongo calls every fresh crop of babies newbies. She pretends to be annoyed by their antics, but I know better. Listen, Bongo urged. Sure enough, I could hear the baby skunks wailing from their hidden nest under the porch. But we love Red, Mama, one of them cried. Hush there, Mama. Fresh-baked bread scolded. It's the middle of the day. You're supposed to be asleep. You're crepuscular. Crepuscular creatures like fireflies, bats, and deer are especially active at dawn and dusk. Will Red be all right, Mama? Another baby whose voice I recognized as Rose Petal asked. All skunks name themselves after pleasant scents. I'm not sure if this is because they're a bit defensive about their reputation or if they just have a sly sense of humor. Of course, said her mother. Red is indestructible. Bongo looked at me. See what I mean? Oh dear, I said. By tonight they'll all have heard. The opossums, the raccoons, the owls. Little Harold will be beside himself. Harold was the smallest barn owl nestling and a great worrier. Barn owls give themselves sensible, no-fuss names. I'll talk to everyone, Bongo said. Calm them down. Tell them not to worry. I'm sure things will be fine, I said. I've seen a lot in my years. The things I've fretted about that have never come to pass. I could write a book. I paused. In fact, I could be a book. I paused again. Because, paper's made of trees. Bongo gave a screechy crow laugh. She didn't even scold me for my lame joke. That's when I started to worry. Chapter 17. As much as I was concerned about the baby's reaction to Francesca's words, I was more worried about Samar. What would happen when she returned from school and saw the word carved into me? Would she think it was meant for her and her family, as Francesca and the police seemed to assume? She came home alone. Ahead of her by a few yards was Stephen. A reporter from the neighborhood newspaper was waiting on the sidewalk, interviewing people as they walked by. Word travels fast in our parts, especially when there's yellow police tape involved. Had they seen what had happened? The reporter kept asking. Had they ever made wishes on wishing day? What did they think the word leave meant? The reporter approached Stephen. Did he know why someone would carve leave into the beloved local wish tree? Stephen stared at the reporter, and then he glanced behind at Samar, sending her the shadow of a sad smile. Without answering the reporter, he headed toward his house. Samar's eyes darted from Stephen to the reporter to me. She ran closer, saw the word, and gasped. She reached a hand toward me, but the police tape put me out of reach. "Are you a resident?" the reporter asked. "Would you like to comment on the incident?" Samar didn't say a word. She turned and walked up the sagging steps to the little blue house, her head held high, standing tall, reaching deep. Chapter 18. Let's see, when did I say we were going to stop? We're going to read 18 and 19. Around 6 that evening, Sandy and Max returned. When the police knocked on the door of the greenhouse, Stephen's parents opened it and answered questions. They shook their heads, they shrugged, then they shut their door and closed the curtains. When the police knocked on the door of the blue house, Samar's parents opened it and answered questions. They rubbed their eyes, they sighed, then they too shut their door and closed the curtains. As Sandy and Max headed back to their cruiser, Sandy paused beneath me. "I wonder if we should make a wish," she said. "Might be our last chance." "I'll tell you what I wish for," Max said. "I wish I didn't have to investigate things like this." Sandy patted his shoulder. "I wouldn't hold my breath on that one." As for me, I spent the evening hours reassuring the parents and the offspring who called me their home. They weren't just worried about where they would have to move, of course. They were worried about me. I was worried about me, too. I didn't want to leave the world I loved so much. I wanted to meet next spring's owl nestlings. I wanted to praise the new maple sapling across the street when it blushed red as sunset. I wanted my roots to journey farther, my branches to reach higher. But that is how it is when you love life, and I could accept that if my time had come, it had come. After a life as fine as mine, who was I to complain? I was worried about the babies, though, about their parents scrambling to find new safe places to line their nests, dig their burrows, hide their winter stashes of acorns. Most of all, I was worried about Samar. I don't know why. Perhaps it's because she reminded me so much of another little girl from another long time ago, a little girl I'd managed to shelter successfully, Francesca's great-grandmother. Like I said, we go way back. Chapter 19. Long after midnight, Samar came to visit me. She wore a blue robe. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her eyes held moonlight in them. She sat at the base of my trunk on her blanket. She didn't look at the carved word or the splinter of moon or the blue and green houses. She just sat quietly and waited. It always took a while, but it always happened. One by one, the babies ventured out to see her. Harold was first, flapping awkwardly down to the ground. The raccoon babies, you, and you, were next. Raccoon mothers are notoriously forgetful, so they don't bother with traditional names. The opossums, the skunks, they all came. Samar sat perfectly still. The babies circled her. Together they sat in the shimmer of moonlight and listened to my leaves rustle. And there's the raccoon family. Bongo settled on Samar's shoulder. "Hello," she said in her crow version of Samar's voice. "Hello," Samar said, echoing the echo. Bongo squawked and Samar jumped a bit. Even Bongo's quietest caw is a bit on the harsh side. Bongo flew up to my smallest hollow and poked her head inside, her tail feathers still visible. With something shiny in her beak, she returned to the ground in front of Samar. Gently, she placed a tiny silver key attached to a long faded red ribbon in Samar's open hand. "It's beautiful," Samar whispered. "Thank you." Bongo bent forward, wings spread, in a sort of bow. It was, in crow circles, a sign of great affection. I'd seen that key before. Bongo had inherited it from her mother. Crows live in extended families, and they pass information across generations. It didn't surprise me that Bongo still had the key, Luna. Or that she'd decided to give it to Samar. In the sweet calm, surrounded by everything I loved, moonlight, air, grass, animals, earth, people, I wondered with a pang how much longer I would be able to savor such memories, such moments. I wondered, too, if I'd done enough for the world I loved. It was something I'd asked myself before, but impending death has a way of focusing your attention. Sure, I'd provided plenty of shade, made oceans of oxygen for people to breathe, been a home to an endless parade of animals and insects. I'd done my job. A tree is, after all, just a tree. Like I told Bongo, we grow as we must grow, as our seeds decided long ago. And yet, 216 rings, 864 seasons, and still something was missing. My life had been so safe. Upstairs, a curtain in the greenhouse moved. Behind it, Stephen was just visible, watching us. I knew what he was thinking. One of the advantages of being a good listener is that you learn a great deal about how the world works. In Stephen's eyes, in the way he'd looked at Samar that afternoon, I saw something I'd seen many times before. A wish. All right, we'll start the next recording with chapter 20.